Some betrayals cut so deep that they changed not only your heart but your entire destiny. Mine happened on a cold night in July 1965 when I discovered that the two people I trusted most were living a lie that would shatter everything I believed to be true. Good morning, good afternoon, or good evening, my dear friends. Before I begin today's story, I want to sincerely thank all 67,000 subscribers this channel has reached. I'm truly grateful to each of you who choose to spend some time with me, listening to the stories of my life. I'd really love to know what kinds of stories you enjoy the most. Let me know in the comments because I have many tales locked away in the vault of my memory, and I want to share the ones that speak most to your hearts. Please feel free to subscribe to the channel, like this video, and comment where you're watching from. It would warm my heart to know that people from all over are tuning into my story. Now, I'm going to share a story that deeply marked my life. I was born in 1947 in a small town called Santa Cruz do Sul, in the countryside of Rio Grande do Sul. It was a different time when women had very few choices in life. I grew up hearing that our destiny was to get married, have children, and take care of the home. And that's exactly what I did, just like all the girls my age. At 19 in 1962, I married Arlindo Cleusa, a hardworking young man I met at a church event. He was 24, handsome, came from a good family, and worked in a local business. My parents immediately approved of our marriage. My father, Mr. Antônio, was a strict man respected in the community. He had a small farm where he grew tobacco, the main product of our region. My mother, Dona Inés, was like many women of that era, quiet, obedient, used to swallowing any problem to keep the peace at home. Our house was simple but comfortable, located in the more urban part of town. On weekends, we would visit my parents at the farm, about half an hour from the city. Arlindo got along very well with my father and always offered to help him with the heavier chores. I felt proud to see how well they understood each other, how my husband respected my father. The first years of our marriage were peaceful. I took care of the house, did sewing work to help supplement our income, and dreamed of the day we would have children. Arlindo was attentive. He would sometimes bring me small gifts, a hair ribbon, a pastry from the bakery. It wasn't a passionate love like in romance novels, but it was what I knew, what I expected from life. Back then, things were different. We didn't have a telephone at home. Television was rare and news traveled slowly. The world moved at a different pace. People got married for life, no matter what. Divorce was a forbidden word, a shame for any family. In 1965, we had been married for 3 years, and I was starting to worry about not being pregnant yet. The neighbors were already whispering. My mother-in-law asked indirect questions about grandchildren. Arlindo said he didn't mind, that it would happen when God wanted it to. I prayed every night for a child. It was that winter when things began to change. July 1965 was particularly cold in our region, with heavy frost every morning. The kind of cold that seeps into your bones and doesn't go away even with all the wool blankets. Arlindo started leaving for work earlier. I need to organize the stock before the customers arrive, he'd say. I've also started coming home later. Your father needs help with the preparations for the harvest. I'm going to the farm after work. I believed him. Why wouldn't I? Trust was the foundation of our marriage, or so I thought. But small things began to bother me. A different smell on his clothes. It wasn't a woman's perfume. It was something I couldn't identify. Letters he quickly hid when I walked into the room. Whispered conversations with my father that stopped abruptly when I approached. I also began to notice changes in my father. He who had always been stern was now smiling more and seemed lighter. My mother, on the other hand, was quieter than usual, more tense. When I asked if everything was okay, she would just say, "It's just age, dear. We get old. Our bodies ache." I remember lying in bed every night listening to Arlindo snoring beside me while I stared at the dark ceiling, feeling that something was wrong but unable to understand what it was. That feeling that there's a shadow in the house, a secret hidden within the walls, but you can't quite see it. In the community, we were seen as the perfect family. Arlindo was praised for being so helpful to my father. A son-in-law like him doesn't exist anymore. The ladies at church would say. I smiled, thanked them, and kept my worries to myself. One time I found a handkerchief in Arlindo's jacket pocket. It wasn't mine. It had the initials AS embroidered in the corner. Antônio Silva, my father. When I asked about it, Arlindo said my father had lent it to him on a cold day. That made sense. But why was my heart racing? Life seemed to carry on as usual. On Sundays, we went to Mass. Afterward, we had lunch at the farm with my parents. My mother made the traditional rice and jerked beef, seasoned just the way she liked it. Then the men would chat on the porch, enjoying their coffee, while us women washed the dishes and gossiped about the town's happenings. It was on one of those Sunday afternoons that I noticed how my father looked at Arlindo. It wasn't the look of a father-in-law at a son-in-law. It was something more, something that sent a chill down my spine. When our eyes met, my father quickly looked away, pretending to be interested in the distant tobacco field. That night, I couldn't sleep. The pieces were beginning to fit together, but my mind refused to see the full picture. It was too absurd, too impossible. Not in our family, not in our town, not at that time. The following Wednesday, I was at home, sewing a dress for the neighbor's daughter. When I heard a knock at the door, it was my mother, paler than I had ever seen her. Her hands were trembling, and there was a look in her eyes that scared me. "Can I come in, my daughter?" she asked, her voice shaky. I made coffee for both of us. She sat at the kitchen table, holding the cup in her wrinkled hands, but not drinking. The silence between us was heavy, like a dark cloud before a storm. "Cleusa, I need to tell you something, but I don't know how," she finally said, taking a deep breath, as if gathering the courage to dive into icy water. "I went to bring food to your father in the shed out back last night. The light was off, but I heard voices." My mother paused. Silent tears ran down her aged face. I already knew what was coming next. My heart knew it too, but my mind was still fighting the truth. I recognized Arlindo's voice. "They didn't see me. I saw your husband and your father together, my daughter." She didn't need to say more. The world stopped moving at that moment. It felt as if the ground had disappeared beneath my feet, as if all the air had been sucked from my lungs. "Are you sure, Mom?" I asked, already knowing the answer, already having seen the signs I had refused to acknowledge. "I am, sweetheart. It's not the first time. I've had my suspicions for months. The looks, the meetings. Your father has changed towards me, and now I finally understand why. That afternoon I cried in my mother's arms like I never had before. It wasn't just the betrayal, it was the lie, the deceit, the years spent living a charade. It was the shame, the humiliation of realizing that maybe others knew or suspected too. It was the bitter truth that the two people I trusted most, my husband and my father, had conspired to deceive me, to deceive my mother. "I won't live like this anymore, daughter," my mother said with a firmness that surprised me, coming from a woman who had always been so submissive. "And should you?" That night I couldn't sleep. Arlindo came home late as usual, offering the same tired excuse. I pretended to be asleep, unable to look at him, unable to confront him yet. I needed to be sure. I needed to see it with my own eyes. And that's exactly what I did the next day. I told Arlindo I was visiting a client across town. Instead, I went to my father's farm. I knew that at that hour he would be working in the shed where he stored the dry tobacco. I approached quietly, my heart pounding so loud I thought it might be heard from afar. I slipped in through the back and hid behind the haystacks. I didn't have to wait long. My father was there, and soon after Arlindo arrived. I saw them embrace. I saw them kiss. I witnessed the intimacy between them, the familiarity in their gestures, which made it clear this had been going on for a long time. I felt disgust, anger, humiliation, but above all, a determination growing inside me. I returned home with a fire in my chest unlike anything I had ever known. The tears had dried, replaced by a cold, calculated rage. When my mother came home later, she saw my expression and understood right away. "You saw it too, didn't you?" she asked. I just nodded, feeling the same. "We're not fleeing like fugitives," I declared, holding on to a strength I didn't know I had. "They betrayed us, deceived us, lived a lie at our expense. They're the ones who should feel ashamed, not us." It was at that moment, sitting at the kitchen table with my mother, two women betrayed in the worst possible way, that we decided we would not be silent victims. We refused to accept the fate of quiet humiliation that society expected of us. Our revenge was just beginning. That night was the longest of my life. Sitting in the living room with my mother until dawn, we planned every detail of what we would do. I don't know where all that strength came from. Maybe it was anger or desperation, or perhaps it had always been inside us, just waiting for the right moment to awaken. "We won't leave like fugitives," I kept repeating to my mother, seeing the same fire burning in her eyes as in mine. "We would leave, yes, but on our own terms." I glanced at the calendar hanging on the kitchen wall. It was mid-July, and by the end of the month we would have the Festa de São João, the biggest event of the year in Santa Cruz do Sul. The whole community would gather at the church and then for a communal lunch. The mayor, the judge, the police chief, all the important families in the area would be there. It would be the perfect stage. We had just over 10 days to prepare. My mother and I kept up our routines as if nothing had happened. I served breakfast to Arlindo. I smiled when he lied about working late. My mother took care of the house-prepared meals, for my father listened to his fabricated stories about work on the farm. With each of their lies, our resolve grew stronger. We met during the day while they were out to organize our departure. My mother began collecting the money she had saved over the years, earnings from small sewing jobs she did, from eggs she secretly sold, from the spare change she managed to save from the grocery money. It wasn't much, but it would be enough to start over. She had always known one day she would need this. She showed me the cookie tin where she hid the money, buried in the yard under the rose bush. I never imagined it would be for this purpose. We also sent a letter to my Aunt Aurora, my mother's younger sister, who lived in Porto Alegre. We didn't tell her everything, just said we needed a place to stay for a while. She replied quickly, saying her home would always be open to us. I bought 2 bus tickets to Porto Alegre for the night of the St. John's Festival. The vendor at the bus station looked at me curiously. It wasn't usual for women to travel alone, especially on such a festive day. I made up a story about a sick cousin who needed care. He didn't press me further. At home, I started discreetly sorting through some clothes, family photos, important documents, anything that wouldn't raise suspicion. I sewed hidden pockets inside an old skirt where I tucked away our documents and part of the money. Back then, women didn't have bank accounts. They couldn't get credit or loans without their husband's or father's permission. All we had was what we could hide. My mother did the same at the farmhouse. Every day, she brought home a small item of sentimental value. Her grandmother's rosary, a gold brooch she'd received at her wedding, the ring she no longer wore because her fingers had swollen with age. Little treasures that would carry our story. The hardest part was keeping up appearances. On the Sundays leading up to the festival, we attended Mass as usual. We sat in the same wooden pew, listening to Father Joseph's sermon, greeting acquaintances on our way out. Arlindo and my father acted like the respectable men everyone believed them to be. I remember one of those Sundays when Mrs. Carmita, the pharmacist's wife, approached me after Mass. "Cleusa, are you okay? You look down," she asked, genuinely concerned. I smiled. I lied about sleepless nights and headaches. I lied as well as I had learned in those past weeks. The strangest thing was how life went on around us, oblivious to the earthquake that had shattered our world. The baker still made the same bread every morning. The children still played in the square. The church bell still rang on schedule. Only the two of us knew that nothing would ever be the same again. 3 days before the festival, I had an idea. I went to the pharmacy and bought a bottle of sleeping pills, the kind sold to nervous women. The pharmacist didn't hesitate to sell them, especially after I mentioned my so-called insomnia attacks. Back then, no one questioned a fragile woman needing sedatives. On the eve of the festival, my mother insisted on making the announcement at church herself. "You are young, my daughter. You have your whole life ahead of you. If something goes wrong, if someone reacts badly, let it be with me." I didn't agree. We would do it together, just as we had planned. That night, I slept next to Arlindo for the last time. He slept peacefully, unaware that I was awake, watching his face in the faint moonlight filtering through the window. For a brief moment, a flicker of doubt crossed my mind. What if we're wrong? What if there's another explanation? But then I recalled the scenes I witnessed in the shed, the endless lies, the years spent living a lie. No, we weren't wrong. And even if there was another explanation, they had plenty of time to tell us the truth. The morning of the St. John's Festival dawned cold, but with an unusually clear sky for Julio. I got up early and made coffee as usual. Arlindo remarked on how beautiful I looked, how the blue dress I chose for Mass brought out the color of my eyes. I thanked him like the loving wife he still thought I was. My mother arrived early so we could go to church together. She wore her finest dress, the one she saved for special occasions, along with the gold brooch that belonged to my grandmother. Her face held a calmness I had never seen before. We took our small bags to Mrs. Jenny's house, a trusted neighbor. I left a note saying we'd pick them up later after lunch. She wouldn't be home either since she was going to the festival, but she had a spare key. It was common back then for neighbors to arrange things like this. The church was packed. When we arrived, entire families filled the wooden pews. Restless children were quietly hushed with sharp glances from their mothers. The scent of incense filled the air. My father and Arlindo were already there, waiting for us in their usual spot, the third pew on the right. The Mass followed its usual ritual. Father Joseph spoke about unity, family, and the Christian values that should guide our community. Each word felt like a cruel irony in my ears. I glanced at my mother, who was clutching her rosary, lips moving in silent prayer. When it was time for the offering, as families approached the altar to give their donations, my heart began to race. It was time. My mother stood first. I followed her. We walked slowly down the center aisle, feeling all eyes from the community on us. Father Joseph welcomed us with a smile, holding out the basket for our offerings. But instead of placing the money and returning to our seats as we did every Sunday, my mother stepped forward. "Father Joseph," she said, her voice clear and firm, loud enough for everyone in the church to hear, "I have a public confession to make." An absolute silence fell over the church. I noticed out of the corner of my eye that my father and Arlindo straightened up, their faces suddenly pale. "I discovered that my husband Antônio and my daughter's husband Arlindo have been betraying us," my mother continued, each word heavy in the still air of the church. "Not with other women, but with each other. They've been involved in a hidden affair for months while pretending to be devoted husbands to us." Whispers started immediately, spreading like a wave through the pews. I saw shocked faces, hands covering open mouths in disbelief, glances shifting between us and the two men who were now trying to hide, huddled in their seats. "Cleusa and I came today to say that we refuse to live this lie any longer," my mother went on, her voice growing stronger. We leave these men behind, along with their disloyalty, not us. It was my turn to speak. I stepped forward, feeling a courage I didn't know I had. Aren't we the ones who should be holding our heads high in this town? I said, looking directly at the congregation. They are the ones who betrayed the women they promised to honor and protect, carrying on their affair in secret. Father Joseph was frozen, his face a mask of shock. No one moved, no one spoke. It felt as if time had stopped inside that church. Then, with the same dignity with which we had entered, my mother and I turned and walked toward the exit. Our footsteps echoed in the heavy silence that had settled over the church. I felt the eyes on us. I heard the murmurs beginning to rise behind us. I didn't look back. I didn't need to see my father's or Arlindo's reaction. I knew that at that moment their worlds were crumbling just as ours had crumbled days before. The morning sun greeted us as we opened the church doors. The contrast between the darkness inside and the bright day made me blink. It felt like we were emerging from a long tunnel, finally seeing the light. We went straight to Mrs. Jenny's house, grabbed our bags, and headed to the bus station. We didn't go back home or take anything else besides what we had already set aside. There was nothing there worth more than our dignity. At the bus station, we bought 2 coffees and waited for the bus that would take us to Porto Alegre. Sitting side by side on the wooden bench, we watched the little town we would soon leave behind. "Do you think we did the right thing, Mom?" I asked, a last pang of doubt hitting me. She took my hand in hers, those hands that had worked so hard and endured so much. "We did what needed to be done, my daughter. The truth is, like childbirth, painful and bloody, but the only way to new life." The bus arrived promptly at 2 in the afternoon. We handed our tickets to the driver, a middle-aged man who barely glanced our way, used to anonymous travelers. We chose seats at the back away from the other passengers. When the engine roared and the bus started moving, I felt a mix of fear and relief. We were leaving behind everything we knew, our home, our city, our life, but we were taking with us something far more valuable, our dignity, our truth, our newfound courage. I looked out the window one last time at Santa Cruz do Sul, at the streets I'd known since childhood, at the church steeple now fading into the distance. I knew I would never return. I also knew that the story of what happened in that church would spread like wildfire. It would be told and retold, becoming the scandal of the year, perhaps of the decade. We left behind a social upheaval whose repercussions would be felt for a long time. But that was no longer our concern. Our revenge was complete, not with violence or shouting, but with raw, simple truth exposed to the light of day before the whole community. The journey to Porto Alegre was long, almost 6 hours on the road. I slept for part of the trip, drained by the weight of the last few days, the accumulated tension and the adrenaline now leaving my body. When I woke, we were already entering the capital. The city lights gleamed against the darkening sky. A new world was opening before us. My Aunt Aurora was waiting for us at the bus station, worried about our mysterious phone call and sudden arrival. Later, we would tell her the whole story. For now, a tight hug was enough, the silent embrace, the unspoken promise of a new beginning. That night, lying on the makeshift bed in my aunt's living room, staring at the unfamiliar ceiling, I realized I was no longer the Cleusa everyone knew, the devoted wife, the obedient daughter, the woman who accepted her fate without question. That Cleusa was left behind at the St. Cruz do Sul church. Who would I be now? In this new life unfolding before me, it was still a mystery. One thing I knew for sure, I would never again let anyone define my worth, my truth, or my destiny. The first few days in Porto Alegre were a blur of conflicting emotions. The relief of having escaped mixed with the fear of the unknown. The satisfaction of revenge achieved alternated with moments of doubt about the future. My Aunt Aurora's house, a simple 2-story home in the Cidade Baixa neighborhood, became our temporary refuge. Aurora was 15 years younger than my mother and very different from her. She had never married, worked as a secretary at a law firm, and lived alone, something scandalous by our family's standards. Now I see that she was our first glimpse of how a woman could be independent, but back then, we were simply grateful for her generosity. "You can stay as long as you need," she told us that first night, serving chamomile tea in the small kitchen. She didn't ask questions or demand explanations. She just offered shelter, food, and quiet. By the second week, after we'd had some time to recover from our physical and emotional journey, we told her everything. Aurora listened without interrupting, her eyes widening at times, showing empathy at others. "You did what many would have wanted to do but never had the courage," she said when we finished. "Now you need to think about tomorrow." Tomorrow, a word I had always taken for granted, but now it hung there like a big question mark. What could two women without a husband, without property, with little formal education and limited savings, do in a big city like Porto Alegre in 1965? Aurora helped us find a room to rent, not far from her house. It was small with a double bed. We would share a 2-burner stove, a table with 2 chairs, and an old wardrobe. The bathroom was shared with other tenants down the hall. It felt miserable compared to what we had before, yet it represented something precious. It was our space, earned with our own money. In August 1965, we began working. My mother found a job cleaning houses nearby. With my sewing skills, I started doing small repairs and alterations for a local clothing store. Money was tight just enough for rent and simple meals, but every penny symbolized our hard-won independence. The nights were the hardest. After long, exhausting days lying in the narrow bed, we sometimes allowed ourselves to cry. Not out of regret, never out of regret, but mourning the life we had left behind. My mother at 58 now had deeper wrinkles, her hair quickly graying, hands roughened by labor she had never done before. "Was it worth it, daughter?" she asked one night, her voice barely a whisper in the dark room. "It was worth it, Mom," I replied without hesitation. "We are poor, we are tired, but we are truly living. That is priceless." About 2 months after our arrival, we received our first news from Santa Cruz do Sul. A letter from Daisy, my cousin, who still lived there. I opened it with trembling hands, my mother by my side, both of us fearing and hoping for news. Daisy described the chaos we had left behind. Our revelation at church had been just the beginning. After we left, confusion and shouting erupted. My father tried to claim we were crazy, that we had made everything up. Arlindo simply fled the church, unable to face the accusatory stares. In the days that followed, the story spread through town like wildfire. What had once been whispers and secret glances between 2 men, something that could be hidden and denied, was now exposed in the light of day, impossible to ignore. My father lost clients at the farm. People refused to buy his tobacco. Arlindo was fired from the store where he worked. Both became outcasts in the community that had once respected them. Father Joseph tried to intervene, preaching forgiveness and understanding, but even the church couldn't stop the scandal. "Your father comes from the farm to survive," Daisy wrote. "Arlindo was last seen boarding a bus to Paraguay. They say he couldn't bear the shame." I read the letter aloud to my mother. When I finished, we sat in silence for a long time. There was no comfort in knowing about their suffering, only a strange sense of justice being served. "You reap what you sow," my mother finally said, quoting the Bible she knew so well. That letter was closure, a full stop to the previous chapter of our lives. Now we could look ahead without the weight of the past holding us back. At the end of 1965, with Christmas approaching, we took our next step. My mother had saved a little extra money by baking cakes and sweets for parties. I kept doing sewing work, now serving a few private clients that Aurora had introduced to me. We pooled our savings and rented a larger space, a cozy apartment at the back with 2 small bedrooms, a living room, kitchen, and its own bathroom. It was modest, but it marked tremendous progress. The most important part, It had an extra room where we could work. We bought a used sewing machine, paying for it in 12 installments. It was our first big investment. My mother painted a simple sign, repairs and alterations, Donas in Cleusa. We hung it in the window facing the street and waited for someone to notice. The first clients were curious neighbors. We made hems, adjusted dress waists, and replaced zippers. Simple work, but done with care. Soon, word spread. The seamstresses out back know what they're doing, they said. Gradually, we began to receive requests for new clothes, not just repairs. By mid-1966, we already had a small, loyal clientele. My mother, who always had a special talent for cakes and sweets, began taking orders to supplement our income. Our home sometimes smelled of sugar and cinnamon in the morning and of fabric and thread in the afternoon. It was around this time that I met Helena, a young teacher who had recently moved to Porto Alegre. She came to have a dress altered, and we ended up talking for hours. She was educated, independent, full of ideas about the future, women's rights, and a world I could barely imagine. Helena became a friend and a regular client. Through her, we met other women, teachers, nurses, secretaries, women who worked, earned their own money, and made their own choices. It was a world so different from what I knew in Santa Cruz do Sul. In 1967, Helena brought us an idea that would change our lives. She taught at a school for girls from rural areas who came to study in the capital. Many of these girls stayed in expensive boarding houses or with families who took advantage of them. You have space here. Why not host 1 or 2 students? You'd earn extra income and help these girls, she suggested. At first, the idea seemed absurd. Our apartment was small. There was barely enough room for the 2 of us. But the more we thought about it, the more it made sense. We could rearrange the rooms, maybe even look for a bigger place if it worked out. In February 1968, we welcomed our first guest, Lucy, an 18-year-old who came from Caxias do Sul to study nursing. She was shy, scared of the big city, and grateful to find a welcoming environment. We charged a fair price for her stay, which included breakfast and dinner prepared by my mother. Lucy brought new life into our home. Her stories about college, her dreams and ambitions reminded us there was a whole world out there beyond the walls of our small apartment. In the second semester, we hosted another student, Martha, who came from Pelotas to study accounting. With 2 guests, the apartment became cramped but cozy. The girls helped with small household tasks, and in return, my mother cared for them as if they were family. At Christmas 1968, our table had 4 places, me, my mother Lucy, and Martha. We prepared a simple but hearty feast. We sang, exchanged small gifts, and toasted with inexpensive wine. It was the first truly happy Christmas since we left Santa Cruz do Sul. In 1969, the sewing business was thriving enough for us to hire an assistant. Antonietta was a widow who lived in the neighborhood and had skills with needle and thread. With her help, we could take on more orders, including party dresses and simple suits. In early 1970, we made a significant decision to move to a bigger house. With the savings from the past few years and a small loan that Aurora helped us secure, we rented an old house in the same neighborhood. There were 4 bedrooms, a spacious living room, a large kitchen, and a small backyard. We renovated the place ourselves. We painted the walls, sanded the old floor, and sewed new curtains. The front room became our sewing workshop, now with 2 machines. The old one and a new one we bought outright with the money we had saved. In March 1970, we officially opened the Seamstresses boarding house, as the girls affectionately called our home. We could accommodate up to 6 students, in addition to the 2 of us and Antonietta, who eventually moved into a small room at the back. News spread quickly among college students. Soon we had a waiting list for spots. What set us apart was the family atmosphere, my mother's home-cooked meals, the convenient location near downtown, and the fair price. The girls' stories filled the house with life and hope. They were young women studying, dreaming of careers, talking about a transforming Brazil. even under the pressure of the increasingly harsh military regime. Through them, we discovered new music, different ideas, and ways of seeing the world that we never would have encountered in our old life. My mother, already over 60, seemed to be rejuvenated by the company of the students. She taught them how to cook simple dishes, mend their own clothes, and run a household. In return, they helped her improve her reading. My mother had always had little formal education, making it hard for her to grasp the rapidly changing world around us. One night in July 1970, sitting on the porch of our new home watching the street life, I realized how far we had come in the 5 years since leaving Santa Cruz do Sul. From two frightened women with no prospects and carrying only dignity and a small savings, we had become businesswomen, small and modest, but the owners of our own business, our own destiny. The pain of betrayal never completely faded. There were nights when I still woke up thinking about Arlindo, about how I had been deceived, about how different our lives could have been. But those nights grew increasingly rare. The present was too full, too rich with new experiences to be stuck in the past. Our revenge, the public confession in church, had only been the beginning of our true liberation. The true revenge, I realized then, wasn't exposing their betrayal, but the life we built afterward, a life we never would have had if we had stayed trapped in that lie. The 1970s arrived, bringing winds of change to Brazil and to our small but meaningful achievement in Porto Alegre. Our student boarding house flourished, along with the sewing workshop. What had begun as a survival necessity transformed into a legitimate business, supporting not only us, but also creating opportunities for other women. In March 1971, we received a letter that would once again change the course of our lives. It was from Daisy, my cousin from Santa Cruz do Sul, the same cousin who had told us years before about the fate of my father and Arlindo. I opened the envelope with trembling hands, sitting at the kitchen table while my mother prepared breakfast for our 6 boarders. Uncle Antônio passed away last week, the letter said. He was found alone at home. The doctor said it was his heart. The farm is abandoned. Almost everything was sold to pay off debts, but the house and a piece of land remain. Since you are the legal heirs, you need to come and sort things out. I read the letter quietly to my mother, away from the hearing of the girls getting ready for college. She was silent for a long moment, her hands still hovering over the cake batter she was making. I feel nothing, she finally said, neither sadness nor relief. It's as if I'm reading about a stranger. I understood completely. The man we had once called husband and father had become a distant, almost fictional figure in our new lives. His death was simply a fact, not a loss. Still, there were practical matters to handle. As legal heirs, we had to decide what to do with what was left of his assets. After much discussion, we decided I would go alone to Santa Cruz do Sul. My mother would stay behind to manage the boarding house and the workshop. I don't have the strength to go back to that place, she told me. Besides, someone has to take care of the girls and the orders. I left on a rainy April morning, my heart heavy, not because of my father's death, but because I was returning to a place that held so much suffering. The boss traveled down the same road that had taken us to freedom 6 years earlier, only now going in the opposite direction. Santa Cruz do Sul felt both familiar and strange at the same time. The same streets, the same houses, the same church where our lives changed forever. But I was no longer the same Cleusa who had left on that festive Sunday. I was a different woman now, stronger, more confident in control of my own destiny. I stayed at Daisy's house, politely declining offers from other relatives who, curious, wanted to hear about our life in Porto Alegre. The news of my return spread quickly. I could feel the stares and hear the whispers as I walked down the street. Some people crossed the road to avoid greeting me. Others approached with questions disguised as concern. The lawyer handling the estate greeted me with excessive formality. He explained that my father had sold nearly everything to cover debts from gambling and drinking. What was left was the house heavily deteriorated and a small piece of land of little value. "Any news about Arlindo?" I asked, trying to sound casual. The lawyer adjusted his glasses, uncomfortable. "No one knows for sure. There are rumors he spent some time in Paraguay. Some say he returned to Brazil, but to a different region. He hasn't been seen around here since." The next day, I visited the homestead. The house where my parents had lived for decades was almost in ruins. The roof had holes, the windows were broken, and tall weeds had overgrown everything. The shed where I witnessed the scene that changed our lives was still standing, but leaning, as if it too was tired of holding secrets. I walked around the property, overwhelmed by a strange mix of emotions. This was where my mother was born. This was where I spent my childhood running through the tobacco fields. This was where I had once imagined raising my own children. Now it was just an abandoned place, filled with ghosts that no longer scared me. I decided to sell everything. There was no reason to keep that land, a house weighed down by painful memories. The lawyer quickly found a buyer, a neighboring farmer looking to expand his property. The amount wasn't much, but it represented a fresh start, a way to turn a legacy of betrayal into something positive. Before leaving, I made one last visit to the church. It was late afternoon, only the caretaker was there, sweeping the stone floor. I sat on the same bench where I had often sat beside Arlindo, pretending we were the perfect family. The altar, the images of the saints, the crucifix. Everything felt the same, as if time had stood still, as if the scandal we had gone through had never happened. Father Joseph found me there, sitting quietly. He looked older, his hair completely white. He now sat down beside me, giving me a few minutes of silence. I had heard about his father's passing. Finally, he said, "My condolences." I thanked him with a nod. "You did the right thing," he continued, surprising me. At the time, I was shocked. Of course, we all were, but over time, I realized it was an act of courage. The truth isn't always comfortable, but it's always the way forward. His words were an unexpected comfort. My mother and I didn't need anyone's approval, but knowing that someone, especially someone like Father Joseph, understood our decision brought a sense of closure I hadn't realized I still needed. 3 days later, I returned to Porto Alegre carrying the money from the sale and a renewed certainty that we had made the right choice, despite all the suffering, despite all the challenges. My mother was waiting for me at the bus station, anxious for news. I told her about the sale, about the condition of the property, about people's reactions in town. I kept Father Joseph's words to myself. She didn't need his approval or anyone else's. Her own strength was validation enough. With the money from the sale, we made a decision that had been forming for some time, to buy our own house instead of continuing to rent. We found an old 2-story house in the same neighborhood, in need of renovation but spacious and well located. It was perfect for our needs, the boarding house, the studio, and our home. Buying that house marked a new chapter in our lives. For the first time, we had something truly our own, built through hard work and determination. The title deed, issued in the names of Ini Silva and Cleusa Souza, meant more than just a piece of paper. It was tangible proof of our independence. The renovations took the rest of 1971. We transformed the ground floor into a spacious sewing studio, with room for 3 machines and a client area. The rooms on the second floor were adapted to accommodate up to 8 students. We reserved the small apartment in the back for ourselves with 2 bedrooms, a living room, kitchen, and a garden that my mother filled with plants and flowers. As the 1970s went on, our small company grew alongside the changes happening in the country. The economic miracle that the military kept praising created a new urban middle class, eager for quality services. Our workshop no longer just handled repairs and adjustments. We also started making custom clothing for special occasions, graduation dresses, suits for job interviews, outfits for parties. In 1973, we hired 2 full-time seamstresses to keep up with the growing demand. Antonieta, our first employee, was now supervising their work while I focused on customer service, and my mother managed the boarding house. That same year, I met Robert, a university professor who came to the shop to have a jacket altered. He was a widower with 2 grown children and had a warm, engaging presence. We began to meet casually, coffee after work, movies on Sundays, short walks in the park. By the time I was 30, I had already given up on the idea of starting a traditional family. The trauma of Arlindo's betrayal had left me deeply distrustful, a fear of opening up again. But Robert was different, patient, respectful, without any pressure or expectations. Our relationship grew slowly, built on honest conversations and mutual respect. He understood my story, my wounds, and my dedication to the business I had built with my mother. He never asked me to be someone I wasn't or to take on roles I didn't want to fulfill. In 1975, Robert proposed to me. I hesitated, not from a lack of love, but out of fear of losing the independence I had fought so hard to earn. We talked openly about it. "I don't want a traditional wife," he told me. "I want a partner who stays exactly who she is." I got married that October in a simple ceremony in our garden. My mother, the boarding house students, our employees, Robert's children, a different kind of family built by choice, not obligation or tradition. I didn't move into Robert's house as was expected. Instead, he moved into our small apartment in the back. "The women of the family come first," he would say, respecting the space we'd created, the business that was our livelihood and identity. In 1976, at 33 years old, I found out I was pregnant. It was a surprise. I believed I would never have children, that this dream had been left behind along with so many other things when I left Santa Cruz do Sul. Pregnancy brought fears and insecurities, but also a joy I never thought possible. My daughter Mariana was born in February 1977, bringing new light into our home. My mother, now a grandmother, found renewed energy to rock her granddaughter, sing lullabies, and knit tiny clothes. The students at the boarding house took turns helping with the baby. Enchanted by the little one who grew up among university books and pieces of fabric, the business continued to thrive, even with my attention divided between work and motherhood. We hired a manager for the workshop, a former student from the boarding house who had graduated in business administration. Under her guidance, we expanded our services, purchased new equipment, and modernized our processes. The boarding house, in turn, became a reference point for students coming from rural areas. We had a waiting list, recommendations from former residents, and a reputation for being a safe and welcoming environment. My mother, now over 70, still personally oversaw breakfast, making sure each girl left well fed to face the day's classes. In 1979, we received unexpected news. A letter arrived addressed to me with no return address. I immediately recognized the handwriting. It was from Arlindo. My hands trembled as I opened the envelope, unsure of what I would find inside. The letter was brief. "Cleusa, I happen to learn your address. I am sick. I probably don't have much time left. I just wanted to say that I regret the suffering I caused. I don't ask for forgiveness. I know I don't deserve it. I just wanted you to know that I recognize the harm I did. Arlindo." I showed the letter to my mother. She read it silently, returned it without a word, and went back to stirring the sauce she was preparing for dinner. There was nothing more to say, nothing left to feel. That man who once was my husband was now just a stranger, whose suffering no longer touched us. I didn't reply to the letter, nor did I try to find out more about Arlindo's illness or where he was. That chapter of my life had long been closed. I had a daughter to raise, a business to manage, and a life I had built with my own hands, brick by brick. The year 1980 arrived, bringing new challenges and joys. Mariana, at 3 years old, was a curious and lively child, enchanted by the sewing machines, the students coming and going, and the books that Robert brought her. Our home, always filled with feminine voices, laughter, and shared stories, was a world apart, a small oasis of possibilities in a world that still struggled to recognize the value and power of women. When I look back at the scared young girl I once was, at the brave decision my mother and I made in that crowded church, I felt a mix of pride and gratitude. The road had not been easy. There were nights of crying, days of doubt, moments of despair, but every obstacle we overcame, every small victory, brought us here, owners of our own destiny, builders of our own story. The revenge we planned in 1965, driven by the pain of betrayal, turned out to be much more than just the public humiliation of the two men who deceived us. It was the first step toward a liberation we didn't know was possible, toward a life we would never have known had we remained trapped in that lie. The price of truth was high. We lost a home, a city, an identity, but the value of the freedom we gained was priceless. That was the true legacy we would pass on, not just to my daughter, but to every young woman who passed through our boarding house, to every woman who worked in our workshop, to anyone who crossed our path and saw that it was indeed possible to rebuild life from the ashes, that it was possible to turn pain into strength, betrayal into liberation. The 1980s arrived, with the winds of change blowing strongly across Brazil. The military regime was beginning to loosen its grip. Movements for democracy filled the streets, and women raised their voices louder and louder. As the nation transformed, our small but significant victory also evolved, taking on new shapes and meanings. Our home, which housed the sewing workshop and student boarding house, became a meeting place for women seeking more than just a place to live or well-made clothes. It was a space where ideas flowed freely, where young university students discussed politics, women's rights, and dreamed of a different future. In 1982, when Mariana turned 5, I made a decision that surprised many. I went back to school. At 39 years old, I enrolled in an adult education program to finish the high school education I had left behind as a teenager. Classes were held at night, 3 times a week. Robert took care of our daughter on those evenings while I sat among much younger students, soaking up knowledge that had been denied to me in my youth. "It's never too late to learn," my mother would say. Now 75, her hair was completely white, but her spirit was younger than ever. She had also improved her reading and mastered more complex math with the help of the students we hosted, proving that age is just a number when it comes to personal growth. In 1983, our family took a heavy blow. My mother was diagnosed with advanced lung cancer. The doctors gave her only a few months to live. The news hit us like a bombshell, shattering the routine we had carefully built. "Don't cry for me before the time," she told me when she saw my tears. "We have a lot of work ahead," and work we did. In the months that followed, we organized the business to run smoothly without her constant presence. We trained one of the former students, now graduated and working with us, to take over managing the guest house. We documented all the recipes my mother prepared for the girls, her methods of organizing the house, and the little secrets that made everything run so smoothly. But it wasn't just the business that needed preparing. My mother wanted to leave another kind of legacy. On nights when the pain eased, she would share stories from her childhood in the countryside, her youth, her marriage to my father, stories she had never told before, some sweet, others bitter, all pieces of who she was, who I was. "Write it all down," she urged me. "One day Mariana will want to know where she came from, who her ancestors were, how we got here." So I wrote it all down, filling notebooks with her memories, preserving her voice, her wisdom, and her experiences for future generations. It was during those late-night talks that my mother revealed something she had kept hidden for all these years. "I knew about your father's meetings with Arlindo long before that night in the barn," she confessed. "For months, maybe years, I had noticed the signs, the absences, the lies, but I had nowhere to turn. I had no way to support myself. so I closed my eyes and pretended not to see. "Why didn't you tell me before?" I asked, surprised by this revelation. "Because you were happy in your ignorance, or at least you seemed to be, and because I was afraid of what we might do if you knew. But when I saw your suffering, your distrust growing day by day, I realized we needed to face the truth together." This confession changed my perspective on our story. What I had always seen as a moment of sudden discovery for both of us was actually the culmination of years of silence and pain for my mother. Her courage was even greater than I had imagined, not only for confronting the truth, but for bearing it alone for so long. My mother passed away in November 1983 on a rainy spring afternoon. She left peacefully in her own bed, holding my hand and Mariana's, surrounded by the students from the boarding house who loved her like a grandmother. Her funeral was simple, but the church was full. Former students from the boarding house, clients from the workshop, neighbors, friends, all touched in some way by that extraordinary woman who reinvented her life at 58 years old. The mourning was deep, but it didn't allow me to sink into it. There was a business to run, a daughter to raise, studies to complete. Besides, I knew the best way to honor my mother was to carry on the legacy we built together. In 1984, I graduated from high school. At 41, I received my diploma wearing a blue suit I had specially sewn for the occasion. Robert, Mariana, and the entire team from the workshop and boarding house were there, applauding when my name was called. It was a moment of immense joy and also reflection. How many doors could have opened if I'd had this opportunity earlier? This question led me to a decision that would change the course of our family business once again. In 1985, with the country breathing in the first air of redemocratization, we transformed one of the boarding house's rooms into a small classroom. There, 2 nights a week, we offered free literacy classes for adult women, maids, cleaners, factory workers who had never had the chance to study. The project started small with just 5 students. We hired a newly graduated teacher, a former resident of our boarding house, and provided basic materials. Soon, the number of interested women grew, and we had to open a second class. Then, a third. We named the project Escola Dona Inés in honor of my mother, who valued knowledge so deeply, yet was denied it in her youth. In 1987, our small educational initiative received official recognition from the Municipal Education Department. With this support, we expanded our classes to include basic vocational training in sewing, cooking, and home management, skills that could help these women gain financial independence, just as my mother and I had done. That same year, Mariana, then 10 years old, started showing an interest in the family business. After school, she would sit in the workshop, watching the seamstresses at work, making small adjustments to scraps, learning the craft secrets that had sustained our family for over 20 years. "Grandma would be so proud of you," I said as I watched her handle the scissors with the same precision my mother once had. The late 1980s brought new challenges. Hyperinflation was tearing through the Brazilian economy, making it increasingly difficult to keep the business afloat. Fabric prices shot up overnight. Our students struggled to pay their tuition. The students at Escola Dona Inés faced even harsher battles just to get by, but we adapted as we always did. We created a barter system. Some students taught classes in exchange for reduced fees. Clients who couldn't pay in cash offered services or products instead. The sewing students contributed to production in exchange for advanced training. It was a small economy of solidarity that defied the odds. In 1990, with the inauguration of the first democratically elected president after the military regime, the country breathed a collective sigh of hope despite ongoing economic hardships. I was turning 47 in age when many women of my generation had already settled into their routines, resigned to their youthful choices, but my path of transformation was far from over. Encouraged by Robert and Mariana, now a teenager, I decided to take the entrance exam for the College of Education. I studied for months, going over my high school equivalency notes, attending classes at Escola Dona Inés, soaking in knowledge from every opportunity. The day of the exam was one of the most nerve-wracking moments of my life. Here I was, a woman nearly 50 years old, sitting among 18-year-olds competing for a place at a public university. When the list of approved candidates was published, my name was on it. The celebration at home was deeply emotional. The boarding students, the seamstresses from the workshop, the schoolgirls, all gathered to celebrate an achievement that had seemed impossible to many. The 4 years of college were intense, balancing studies, business, and family. I attended classes in the mornings, returned to manage the workshop in the afternoons, helped out at school in the evenings, and still found time to watch Mariana grow, a determined and aware young woman, very different from the girl I was at 16. In 1994, at 51, I finally received my diploma in education. At the graduation ceremony, I looked out into the crowd and saw faces that represented every chapter of my reinvented life. Robert, my partner of 2 decades, Mariana, my greatest pride, the first students we welcomed, now established professionals, the seamstresses who grew alongside us, the women who learned to read and write at our school. Each one of them, in their own way, a part of the legacy I built from the ashes of a life that had fallen apart in 1965. The new century was approaching, bringing challenges and opportunities we could barely imagine. The internet was beginning to transform business. Globalization was reshaping the fashion market. New educational technologies were emerging. Once again, we would need to adapt, evolve, reinvent. But if there was one thing I learned on this journey, it was this: the ability to turn pain into strength, obstacles into opportunities, endings into new beginnings. The betrayal that once shattered my world became the first page of a story far larger and more meaningful than anything the life I was born into could have offered. Today, at 78, when I look back, I see not just losses, but above all, gains. I see a woman who refused to be a victim and wrote her own destiny. I see a business that supported generations and opened doors for hundreds of other women. I see a family built not out of obligation or tradition, but out of choice and true love. And when my granddaughters ask me about the secret to a life well lived, I tell them this story. Not so they feel anger toward the men who betrayed us, but so they understand that even in the most painful circumstances, we have the power to choose to remain in the ashes or to rise from them stronger and freer than ever before. This is my story, my legacy, my ultimate revenge against all those who doubted that 2 women alone, without formal education or resources, could not only survive, but thrive and transform lives. The greatest lesson I've learned and want to leave you with is this: true freedom begins when we find the courage to live our own truth, no matter the cost. Before I say goodbye, I want to thank all of you who have joined me on this journey through memories. If my story has touched your heart in any way, please give it a like, subscribe to the channel to hear other stories like mine, and share it with someone who might need to hear that it's always possible to start over. Let me know in the comments where you're watching from, and if you've ever faced a situation where you needed to find the strength to rebuild your life. Your stories deserve to be heard too. Thank you so much, and see you next time.